بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Welcome guys. I am Dr. Asma Mahmoud Bakr. We are studying human rights. It's important and easy subject at the same time. Now let's get started. In this lecture, the elements of the subject: number 1, preface; number 2, the definition of Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Some photo shows documents of Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and we talk about where and after all the Universal Human Rights begin. Also, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and it consists of preamble and 30 articles. And in the end, we talk about small conclusion. I will talk about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It's a milestone document in the history of human rights, drafted by representatives with different legal and cultural backgrounds from all regions of the world. The declaration was proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris on 10 of December 1948 as a common standard of achievements for all people and all nations. It sets out for the first time fundamental human rights to be universally protected, and it has been translated into 500 languages. This photo shows the Universal Declaration of Human Rights document and proclaimed by the United Nations General Assembly in Paris on 10 of December 1948. And this photo shows Eleanor Roosevelt as she reads the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Where, after all, the Universal Human Rights begin. After World War II, it was clear the World War should never be allowed to occur again. With the end of the war and the creation of United Nations, the international community vowed never again to allow atrocities like those of that conflict happen again. World leaders decided to complement the United Nations Charter with a roadmap to guarantee the rights of every individual everywhere. The document they consider and later becomes the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, was taken up at the first session of the General Assembly in 1946. The people of United Nations determine faith in fundamental human rights, the dignity and worth of human person, and the commitment to promote a better standard of life in larger freedom. Now I will talk about some points. It's very important before talk about the declaration or articles of human rights. Whereas the recognition of the inherent dignity and of the equal and unalienable rights of all members of the human family is a foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world. Whereas disregard and contempt of human rights results in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech and belief and freedom from fear, and what has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of common people. Whereas disregard and contempt of human rights results in barbarous acts which have outraged the conscience of mankind, and the advent of a world in which human beings shall enjoy freedom of speech, belief, and freedom from fear, and what has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of the common people. Whereas it is essential, if man is not be compelled to have recourse as a last resort to rebellion against the tyranny and oppression, that human rights should be protected by the rule of law. Whereas it is essential to promote the development of friendly relations between nations. This point is very important. Whereas the people of United Nations have in charter reaffirmed their faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of human person, and the equal rights of men and women, and have determined to promote social progress and better standards of life in larger freedom. Whereas member states have pledged themselves to achieve, in cooperation with the United Nations, the promotion of universal respect of human rights and fundamental freedoms. Whereas common understanding of these rights and freedoms is of the greatest importance of the full realization of this pledge. Now, therefore, the General Assembly proclaims this Universal Declaration of Human Rights as a common standard of achievement for all people and all nations, to the end that every individual and every organ of society keeping this declaration constantly in mind shall strive by teaching and education to promote respect for these rights and freedoms, and by progressive measures, national and international, to secure their universal and effective recognition and observance. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights consists of preamble and 30 articles, with Article 1, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Article 2, no discrimination. Article 3, right to life, liberty, and security. Article 4, no slavery. Article 5, no torture or cruel, inhuman, or degrading treatment or punishment. Article 7, equal protection of the law. Article 9, arbitrary arrest, detention, or exile. Fair and public hearing. No arbitrary interference with his privacy. Right to freedom of movement, right to seek and enjoy asylum, right to a nationality, right to marry and found a family, right to property, right to freedom of thought, conscience, and religion, right to freedom of opinion and expression, freedom of peaceful assembly and association, right to take part in government, right to work, right to rest and leisure, right to food, clothing, housing, and medical care, and necessary social services. Right to education, right to participate in the cultural life, now I talk about human rights organization. it's very important, but this organization for reference only. Number 1, United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner. Number 2, the General Assembly of United Nations. United Nations Human Rights. This office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights is the leading United Nations entity on human rights. United Nations Human Rights is represent the world's commitment to the promotion and protection of human rights. If you want to read about it, look at the official website of the organization for reference only. You should remember this organization for reference only. Both the High Commissioner and the office have a unique role too. Number 1, promote and protect all human rights. Number 2, help empower people. Number 3, assist government. Number 4, inject a human rights perspective into all United Nations programs or activity. History of the mandate. The United Nations General Assembly established the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in December 1993. Number 2, General Assembly of the United Nations. Function and powers of the General Assembly. The Assembly is empowered to make recommendations to states on international issues within its competence. It has also entitled action, political, economic, humanitarian, social and legal, which have benefited the lives of millions of people throughout the world. Also, Assembly safeguard human rights and promote the rule of the law and protect our common environment to meet the special needs of Africa and to strengthen the United Nations. The conclusion or a summary from this lecture. These human rights are not country specific. They are not reward for good behavior or particular a certain era or social group. They are the rights of people of every color, from every race and ethnic group, whether or not they have disabilities, citizens or migrants, no matter their sex, their class, their caste, their creed, their age, or sexual or sexual orientation.